Alright everyone, time for some more unfortunate Ebola news, and I'll go over the basics of the Ebola epidemic in the Congo for those that aren't aware. But first, let me take care of some fear-mongering that I saw. When I first got fronted this story yesterday, people were saying, oh, a bunch of people with Ebola escaped from an Ebola ward that was being attacked in Congo, and now they're like running around and they're desperately trying to find them. That's only partially true. What actually happened is that there's a town called Beni in the Congo. And there was an Ebola center there. There were patients there, and the center was attacked by protesters. Now, the reason why this happened is that the local government has delayed their elections there, like voting in their elections, to March because of the Ebola epidemic. This naturally made people angry. They decided to protest. And of course, there was tear gas shot off, and people, started to riot. Unfortunately, they attacked and destroyed the Ebola center, but not before all of the patients, I guess, got out. Now, thankfully, at least 17 of these individuals, about 24 of them, at least 17 had already tested negative for Ebola. They don't have Ebola, they simply were there for, maybe the flu-like symptoms, but in the wake of that, they confirmed they didn't have Ebola. The problem is, of course, that leaves some people unaccounted for now, doesn't it? All you need is one person. You have, again, situation. You have an underdeveloped nation, tends to have underdeveloped medical apparatus. You have someone potentially in fear of their life who could actually have Ebola, who's out there. They could end up infecting a large number of people before they start showing the secondary symptoms, which is like the bleeding from the mouth and vomiting blood and crazy shit like that. Before that, it's flu-like symptoms. The problem is, in a crowded African city, you would expect them to potentially come into contact with a large number of other people, thus spreading it further. This has begun to happen in Butembo. There have been new cases there. There was only one original person, and they weren't even symptomatic at the time. They're like, well, they have Ebola, they were, I guess, tested, and they confirmed that, but they weren't symptomatic. They're probably dead now. Now dozens of other people have caught it. If Ebola begins to spread in yet another area where you have a high enough density to potentially promulgate the spread further, it could become a major problem because they're already struggling to contain it now. There are more and more new cases already. You're battling a civil war, a secondary outbreak of malaria, and the fact that a lot of people there don't have any specific medical knowledge and don't understand the basic concept of contagion. And so it's a huge problem. You got some of these Central African cities, the population density is quite high, compared to certain areas. Now, I remarked, Butembo, generally less so, looks more developed than a lot of areas in the region. That's not saying much. It's not exactly, it's not exactly Boston or something like that. Sanitation levels are still going to be low, and the population, importantly, the population is going to tend to be somewhat malnourished and lack access to more than the most rudimentary care, which is often foreign-fronted anyway. The local medical infrastructure could end up collapsing, as it did in Liberia for many months during their Ebola epidemic, which added to the problem, because local doctors and nurses that don't make six-figure salaries are not willing to put their life on the line to work miserable 12-hour shifts in uncomfortable gear with the ever-present possibility that they get killed or that they contract Ebola and they suffer and become a pariah within their own communities. There's still cases now where people who survived Ebola are treated like lepers in West African society because a lot of people assume, hey, I could still get it from them. They had this horrible bleeding plague, the Red Death. I don't want to be near them. It's weird, they could still be carrying the virus. Now, of course, they're not symptomatic. They're not going to transmit it. There's still that superstition, though. My worry is that will begin to take hold in some of these parts of Central Africa, that it'll jump borders into another culture that maybe is even less receptive towards Western intervention, and then all hell breaks loose. But yes, an Ebola center was destroyed. That means also, by the way, locally, loss of equipment, loss of coordination potentially. It is possible that some Ebola patients that actually have Ebola are now on the loose there. It is possible. So yeah, I mean, you would appeal to calm, but I mean the odds of someone in the middle of a town in the Congo watching a YouTube video about Ebola probably relatively low. I do remember that there was one fairly infamous video. I think it was made in Ghana, if I remember correctly, during the last Ebola epidemic. And there was a dude, and maybe you can, if you have the link to or a backup of this video, you can show me, because I've lost track of it, because the favorites playlist got, in the latest YouTube update, you couldn't add anything to your favorites playlist if you had over 2,000 videos in it. So I had to make like new playlists and shit, split things up. But it was this one dude talking about bushmeat. He's like, oh well, we immerse in boiling water, so you can't get infected. Nothing's gonna make me stop eating my bushmeat. And I thought to myself, I'm hoping that it's a comedy. I'm hoping that this dude is joking, but I'm not sure that he was. There was another one where someone was cooking like a dead rat and ranting about Ebola and laughing about it. And it's like, yeah, rats probably not going to give you Ebola, but again, really strange. I'm telling you, more needs to be done. The biggest threat isn't the current outbreak. The biggest threat is that it mutates and that it becomes more fully airborne or simply more transmissible or starts killing 99% instead of 50%. The biggest risk is the virus to come, not the one you're currently dealing with. Each time that it enters a new person, it has the chance to mutate. There's always the chance. It's not a high chance, but the more patients you have, the higher the chance gets. Now, if you have one person getting a disease, the overall chance of mutation, even if it's a mutation-friendly disease, is low. But if you have 1 million patients, yeah, it probably ends up mutating. That's why we try to suppress these things, slowing down the mutation rate, hopefully, unfortunately. Sometimes things make it more difficult. You give people antiviral drugs or something, and then something becomes resistant and then perpetuates itself because of some problem in the administration of it. This happened with antibiotics. At first, they were basically 100% effective. Then people took them wrong, didn't kill all of the viruses, and slowly evolved them using their own bodies like fucking test tubes. Whoops, yeah, that's led to some problems with staph, especially in these days. Staph and strep and some of these others. Tuberculosis has become resistant. Not drug proof, but drug resistant. You got also, I believe there's a strain of malaria now as well, as if I remember, that has evolved a bit. So it's a big problem. I think attempting to deploy serums and vaccines on Ebola may not be as effective as unfortunately you'd hope. I think the best thing is education, extra sanitation, and teaching people, hey, maybe you shouldn't attack the aid workers. It's probably a bad idea. We've had many Ebola outbreaks. Normally they're fairly quickly contained. They normally don't take place in war zones, though. That's the big problem here. That's about all. Peace out.